We're born in water. And I don't mean that theologically, at least not yet. That's where we're going. But I mean that when a child is born, they are particularly watery. Newborn child, he or she is about 75% water. That's the high tide for us as creatures. And that puts us in pretty watery company. So we're almost as watery when we're born as potatoes. Potatoes are 80% water. A little more watery than a banana. A banana is 74%. We got 75%. I take that as a win. And okay, we're not as wet as some things like a watermelon. Watermelons are 92% water, but who would want to be as watery as a watermelon anyway? But still, we begin our lives as noisy little watery water balloons, and soon enough we start walking or crawling and walking and speaking and thinking. As science writer Lauren Isley once wrote, people are a way water has of going beyond the reach of rivers and oceans. But you know what happens as we grow up and as we age? We dry out. In 1 year, by your first birthday, you're not 75% water anymore. You're 65% water. You've lost 10% in a year. Toddlers are more water than children. By the time we're adults, women are about 55% water. Men are about 60% water. Now, of course, there are variations person to person. Muscular people are among the wettest among us. And different organs and systems within our body vary as well. If you think that the wettest part of us is our blood, then you're mistaken, because our brains, our lungs, our heart, our liver, and our kidneys all contain between 65 and 85% water. Our bones, as you can imagine, are some of our driest parts, and even still, our bones are about 31% water. And of course, there's water in every living cell, water that has about the same salt content as the ocean from which we came. All that to say that in biology and anatomy, water is life. And when we're born, we're at high tide. After that, very gradually, that sea within us starts to ebb, and it goes, and so do we. We also know that water is not just life, water is power. If you've ever watched the news and seen a house being carried down a swollen, flooded channel, then you know how powerful water is. If you've bought a ticket on the Maid of the Mist and ridden the boat to the very edge of Niagara Falls and felt the power of 150,000 gallons a second pouring over a cliff, you know the power of water. Last year, I went, one of my favorite places is Ouray, Colorado. If you haven't been there, you're missing out. You should get up there and see it. When we went to see a waterfall in Ouray where you stand right underneath it, and it's not even a big waterfall. It's small, especially compared to a Niagara Falls, and yet it feels like you're standing next to a freight train that is coming down over the cliff bit by bit and piece by piece. So water's power. Water can be death. As I was a youth minister for 10 years, I had 9 years and 364 really good days where I didn't punch a kid. And one day where they thought they were, we were playing, it was a pool party, and they were dunking me. A big group were all around me, and I got scared because I couldn't get up. And, you get carried away. They weren't doing anything wrong, but I couldn't get up to breathe. And so I socked one of the kids in the stomach, and they stopped, which I would not, well, I don't know. I don't know if I would do it again or not. We're going on the mission trip next month. We'll see how it goes. But, no, I really wouldn't do that. Water's life. Water can be death. Water is power. And in our worship and in our spirituality, water presents those same truths. We're in this series during this 4-week period called Book, Bath, Table, and Time. Those are the 4 things that make worship worship. They make worship different than the other times of our week or our schedule. And so in week 1, we talked about the book, and we learned that our book, our scriptures, are how we come together and we hear our story and we hear God's story and the beautiful ways that those 2 stories are intertwined together. Last week, we talked about the table. that worship is where we find that thing that sustains us and gathers us together. And we find around the table that God has a big table and there's room for all. There's a seat at the table with your name on it. And so we come this week to Bath. Because for us as Christians, one of our most powerful, most life-giving, most foundational symbols is baptism, where water is life, and where water is indeed kind of death, and water is power. We know that Jesus was baptized. I'm not sure why. Because if baptism is where we wash away sin, did Jesus need to wash away his sin in the waters of baptism? Well, no. Did he need to be reborn? I don't know, but I suspect probably not. I love the way that Rachel Held Evans writes, though, about baptism, because among other things in baptism, we do something really important. Baptism is a naming. And perhaps very important is when Jesus was baptized, we heard God speak from the heavens, the scriptures tell us, and God said, "This is my son, the beloved, in whom I am well pleased." God names Jesus beloved, and so baptism is also a sort of naming where we gather together and we name someone as a child of God, as beloved. Baptism acknowledges that. We don't become children of God once we've done enough good deeds or once we're baptized. Jesus didn't start becoming a child of God, the Son of God, once he was baptized. He always was. Being baptized acknowledged that Jesus was beloved, and the same is true for us. It's an acknowledgement of that love that God already has for us. And there are other forces out there that we acknowledge in baptism that also want to throw names our way. That as we live our lives out in the world has a way of finding names for us. Screw up, faker, fat, dumb, addict. There's no shortage. And yet in baptism, God says, nope, your name is beloved. The world will throw some nice names our way too. We'll beckon with more attractive names. Rich, powerful, pretty, bright. And yet in baptism, we're told we're beloved, and that is enough. I don't think I fully realized all of this until I became a pastor and saw the experience of baptism as it's lived out in the church from the other side. Whenever we have a baptism, something happens, and this is very predictable, especially if it's an infant baptism. Maybe not an adult baptism. But in an infant baptism, you have these poor parents who come up here to the front of the church, and they bring their baby with them, and they are just praying the whole way that that baby will behave. And as they come, everybody is waving at the baby, and you make little oohs and ahs, because that's a cute little baby that you're bringing up to be baptized. And so we say that's cute. And then we make another mistake. When the child comes up here, sometimes they don't behave. If only I had an example from the recent past where a baby hadn't behaved in a baptism, but like at Easter. That was a sketchy one. But, screams, bloody murder, squirms and fusses. And you know what y'all think when that happens? Oh, that's even cuter. Like, that's what you come for a baptism for, is because it's really cute to see those babies misbehave. You kind of feel for the poor parents, but it is cute. But the problem is, baptism is not about being cute. It's not about the way we set the stage. We're not bashing a bottle of champagne on the bow of a ship and then sending it on its way. What baptism is about, and this is true theologically for adults or infant baptisms, baptism is acknowledging our own vulnerability. Before you ask God to come into your life when you were totally needy, God comes down and blesses you and calls you beloved. You are on the receiving end of God's grace without even asking for it. And in baptism, we talk about baptism the way I talked about water at the beginning, and I think all three instances it's true. So, yes, baptism is about death. It's kind of a dark thing to think about for a Sunday morning, but in baptism, I get to ritualistically drown you. And I got to tell you, it's a little bit fun sometimes. Welcome to church, everybody. We're hardcore here. And it's about drowning the old you. It's also about birth and life and rebirth. I mean, Jesus talks about that we use the phrase to be born again or to be born from above. The language means both. It's birth and death. Those are boundaries that baptism busts through. And so baptism in some ways is about boundaries and barriers like death and birth that God breaks through. The power of God breaks through any boundary, any barrier we've lifted up between us and God. And in that sense, baptism is about power. I love this text in Acts because, yes, it's a baptism story. But it starts by acknowledging a barrier that even early on in the very early church had been built up. Because let's be honest, sometimes in church we're darn good at building our barriers up. And so the story starts in the middle of this controversy that sort of marked the life of the first century church. There was this argument that sort of pervaded the very early church. And Peter and the other disciples struggle with it and how to think about it and lead the church through it. Who is in and who's out? And specifically, is the church meant to be a movement that is for those people that we would traditionally think are God's people, the Jews? Or is God calling us to be a broader people? Is it just Jews or Greeks and other Gentiles? Welcome. And you got to understand, in that time and place, Jews and Gentiles, they lived sort of side by side, but they lived kind of like familiar strangers. I mean, they would work and shop and go about their day together, maybe do business side by side, but they were strangers to one another. They didn't eat together. They certainly didn't worship together. They didn't welcome each other in for hospitality. So where's the boundary between who God is and sorry, I'm phrasing that totally wrong. It's about a question of where is that boundary? Where does that boundary belong? Not just in life, but in God's life. And so Peter is struggling with all of this, and where do we include people, and where is it appropriate to do so? And also, all these miraculous things are happening that are in the text right before what we read. So, for example, Peter has this dream, and it's kind of wild, and it gets him thinking. Or Peter meets this man named Cornelius, who is a Gentile. He's a centurion, a Roman centurion. And should be someone a nice Jewish kid like Peter has nothing to do with. And yet Peter's very drawn to him and knows that God is doing something in his life. And so finally, Peter one day, he's preaching, and this question of who's in and who's out is hanging over his head. And there are all these Gentiles in the room as he's preaching. Maybe he doesn't even want them there. And all of a sudden, the Gentiles, the outsiders, they start speaking in strange tongues, speaking God's praises and the promise of God. Peter knows what this is, by the way. He has seen it before. We'll celebrate it next week when we all wear gaudy red clothes. And he knows what Pentecost looks like because a few chapters previous, he saw that all the Jewish believers did the same thing. They were from far and wide, and yet they spoke strangely, and miraculous things happened. In fact, a lot of theologians call this text we read today the Gentile Pentecost. It's like God is saying, these people over here, they're my people too. I have a name for them too. It's the same name that I have for you. It's beloved. My Spirit, I've poured it out on these Gentiles too. And so now you get to see this miracle. And so Peter baptizes them. When I think about all that, I'm so relieved that we're so much more advanced today, that we live in so much more of a modern world today in America in the 21st century. I'm so grateful that we don't live as strangers to one another, divided between Gentile and Jew. It's a good thing we don't emphasize and live divided like that between race or class or gender or politics. Because if we lived like that, we'd be in some real trouble. What worries me, and I know I talk about this a lot, But what worries me is the ways that we emphasize our differences with such effortlessness in our culture today. This segment I'm going to call Mediocre Science with Pastor Josh. But I made something I used to do this with teenagers. And what you do is you have this liquid. It looks like purple Kool-Aid, which would work great with the Mother's Day moment, but it's not. It is pigment that I got out of cabbage by boiling red cabbage. My house smells great right now, let me tell you. My mom's coming over for Mother's Day. It's going to remind her of what it was like raising teen boys when she walks in the house, I promise, because it kind of smells like feet in there. But what this pigment does is it gives us a tool to do a rudimentary test, because we have these two liquids over here, and you can actually use this pigment. What this really is about is measuring acidity. This is a rough acid test. So here you have an acid, you have some just regular vinegar, white vinegar, and over here you have a base. It's baking soda that's stirred up. And we'll start over here. If you pour this purple liquid into a base, it will turn blue. And in fact, if we had a stronger base, like if I had brought ammonia, it would turn sort of a greenish yellow. It turns more yellow as it goes along. However, if you pour it in an acid, like the vinegar, oh, it smells so good up here, by the way. Let me just tell you. If anyone wants to drink this afterwards, I'll have some extra. If you pour it in the acid, you get this gnarly magenta color here. Now, here's the thing, and this is leading to a point, other than mediocre science with Pastor Josh. You know that the pigments in there, it actually doesn't change color. There's not really much of a reaction that happens here. What happens is the pigment, as light shines through it, the pigment interacts differently with the light based on the liquid that it's in. So, for example, if we were to pour these two back together and make it a neutral, like a pH 7, which, should we do that, pour the acid and the baking soda here? I'd love to see how the Altar Guild reacted if we did that. If you were to get it back to a 7, though, it would turn right back to this purple color, or something close to it. The dye in there is actually still purple. And that's, sometimes we look at one another only seeing the difference, and not the driving force behind us all, which is the same, which is the Spirit of God. It's a little hokey, I agree, but we are all different. We speak in strange tongues. We're foreign to one another. We're different, and yet, if you were to mix us back up together, yeah, there'd be kind of a bubbly. We'd make a mess. But in baptism, we're all the same, with the same Spirit poured into us. Baptism isn't about sprinkling some water or what we do about it. It's not about recognizing. What it is about is it's recognizing that Spirit which is in us all, and the way that God's Spirit is poured out for all, and acknowledging that all of us are beloved. Peter frames this exactly the right way. He looks at the people who are doing these miracles in his midst, and he poses the question, can anyone withhold the water for baptizing these people who have received the Holy Spirit just as we have? I don't think he's asking a rhetorical question there. I think he's genuinely saying, can anyone prevent this? And doesn't get an answer, so he baptizes. He sees the answer right in front of his eyes, even if it's not the answer that he wants. Because we're not supposed to be in the business here of building barriers. This building is not a fortress to keep the bad people out and keep the good people in, safe and happy. It's a vessel in which God holds us and bathes us and names us beloved. Even as our church changes and our denomination changes, I think we're learning and relearning that. I mentioned last week that General Conference met and made some important decisions. One of the important decisions that wasn't like in the headlines in the news that week had to do with our clergy. In the United Methodist Church, we have two kinds of clergy. We have elders, I'm an elder, and we have deacons. And, for example, Pastor Tiffany is a deacon. And one of the things that General Conference did is they gave deacons something they hadn't had previously, which was sacramental authority. Pastor Tiffany can now baptize people and serve communion. I can't wait to see how Pastor Tiffany does baptism. I think she'll probably hide behind a building with a hose and sneak up and surprise baptize people. I know that's how she'd baptize me. But what I love about this, and I'm still thinking about the implications. I'm not sure we've totally figured this out. But what I love about this is deacons very often are called to ministry beyond the walls of the local church. So what does this do with our sacraments? It will go beyond the walls of the local church with them. What if Tiffany were free and empowered, as she now is, to baptize someone at McCurdy, whether or not it's a traditional church setting? Wouldn't that be an amazing thing to recognize how God's Spirit moves in people, whether they're what we think of as the insiders or not? It would change how I thought of who the insiders and the outsiders were, that's for sure. I would have to reassess who my Gentiles are on my Gentile list when I saw the miracles of God happening through them. There's something universal about baptism. We're all so different, and yet our God is the same, and the Spirit of God is the same, and God's love reaches out and longs for us all, not just the insiders, not just you or me. I think that has to be true not just for the deacons, but for all of us in church. I've been here 11 months now, wrapping up the first year, and been listening and learning, and what I hear and what I know is that time and time again people have said, we're ready to shift gears. I hear that term a lot. We're ready to shift into gear. Because we've had a pandemic and a couple of short-term pastorates, and I think there's a lot of eagerness here at St. John's to start going somewhere. Are y'all ready to go? Start going? I am. I'm excited about that. I don't know how to quite articulate it yet, but what I do know is that a big part of our going is going to involve tearing down the walls that separate our definition of this is church and what is not church. I know that for sure. Because we need to be working more to see how God works beyond our walls and going to be a part of it. Next month, we're going to be doing a few events called prayer walks. We're going to get a group of 10 or 20 together and go walking through different areas of our neighborhood and praying and listening. If you want to be a part of that, let me know, because we want to get people signed up. To pray very carefully, but also listen very carefully and watch and look at what's happening in our own neighborhood. See where there are clues about where God may be calling us. Because God is redeeming and naming our neighbors as beloved. They are welcome in the waters of baptism. And I don't know quite what that means yet, but I just know it's a good thing that God doesn't expect us to know everything in order for our baptism to count. That our baptism isn't about having answers, but seeing how our love for God mixes with our own belovedness by God. And we die. And we're reborn. And there's power in that as water breaks down the barriers. So let us pray. Gracious God, you do call us beloved. You name us that, and we remember that in our own baptisms. So help us to go forth as a beloved people, as a people of one baptism, to share the waters with all. We pray in your name. Amen.